As a brief intro about our project, we are funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council through the Green Transition Ecosystems Award as a consortium of 4 universities, 6 industry and community partners, with an overall consortium team of approximately 50 researchers, stakeholders and experts, and an even wider network of collaborators. Our primary aim is simple: to transform existing 1920s to 1940s council-built housing for future generations with and for local communities, to improve the quality, health and living experience for residents, reduce residential operational energy bills, and deliver holistic beyond net zero solutions whilst increasing the use of bio-based materials. Our objectives are primarily focused around developing 3 transformational processes and solutions: improving the architectural design and space standards, enhancing the building fabric through bio-based and non-extracted products and materials, and integrating low carbon technologies to lower energy demand. All of this is underpinned by a committed approach to co-design, embedding people at the heart of the design process, incorporating diverse perspectives to develop designs that are not only technically and environmentally appropriate, but also socially and economically relevant. Our diverse and multidisciplinary team enables us to explore these objectives from a wide range of, but aligned, approaches, including social sciences, physical sciences, engineering, and design research that varies in content from policy, governance, and design standards to participatory and co-design methods, environmental and life cycle modelling, and skills and training. A significant part of our project is focused on and informed by the live transformation of up to 10 demonstration homes in Bristol and Swansea, co-designed with residents and wider stakeholders to understand, explore, and apply research through design, and you'll hear a bit more about this later. This series of 3 webinars will provide an insight into and showcase this breadth of research, share emerging outcomes, and demonstrate opportunities to transform our existing housing stock. This first webinar is focused on design research approaches for transforming homes for future generations. Before we move into the main talks, I would just like to explain the notion of design research to contextualize what you're about to hear. In the most basic form, design research is research conducted through the process and output of design as the means to research, explore, speculate, test, and challenge a given design-based problem, or in this case, the transformation of existing houses and homes. In this context, the word design is regarded in the broadest sense as a noun, verb, and adjective, but also to the multidisciplinarity of design as architecture, engineering, environmental, regenerative, materials, products, systems, technologies, and so on, all embedded into this project. In terms of transforming homes, as architects, we are using the familiar practice of architectural design to deliver the Swansea and Bristol homes, but also develop design ideas responding to identified opportunities and constraints for broader, transferable and replicable transformations across the UK. In this instance, research outputs in the form of designs are produced through the cyclical process of observe, design, reflect, and design again that produces new knowledge, questions, briefs, and solutions informed by diverse data gathering that generates innovative and holistic responses to quantitative variables of the house fabric and performance, coupled with the qualitative lived experience of the home. Judgments on the success, appropriateness, and replicability of these outputs is explored with residents and stakeholders alike to ensure solutions are fit for purpose, although some solutions will likely push the boundaries of what may be possible within current constraints and may therefore require further developments in policy, regulations, procurement, funding, construction, and more to facilitate the greatest transformations. This webinar will provide more detail and insight into our design research through 2 primary methods that are informing the development of design catalogue: co-design charrettes with residents to understand how their homes work, how the house performs, and how they would transform their homes, an architectural design practice that simultaneously informs and is informed by broader research into environmental modelling, material investigations, wall panel testing at Bath University's large environmental chamber, life cycle modelling, prototyping of bio-based tech sheds with SO Modular and industry partners. The catalogue will be further expanded in due course with co-design methods, further refined design suggestions that address identified needs and opportunities to transform the fabric, space and technology of these homes, and models of transferability, scalability and governance. So moving on to the talks that you're about to hear, we have 2 short presentations today. Laura and Joel will talk about the 1920 to 1940 homes that we're focused on, the co-design approach and design catalogue, and we will end with James and Sanju from Mikhail Architects with reflections from practice on current opportunities and obstacles. Following this, we will have approximately 30 minutes for questions and answers. Hopefully the talks themselves will likely raise a few areas of interest, challenge and opportunity that may provoke or prompt questions from you, so please feel free to respond to those. The Q&A should be available now, so please feel free to add any questions as we go. I will return to these towards the end, and if any of you want to give a thumbs up to any of those questions, please do. It will help to sort of recognise any questions that you'd like us to raise first. But if you prefer to ask any questions live at the end, you may also do so, and we will, you'll be able to turn your camera and your microphone on at that point. So, as we get started, I'd like to just move on to the first talk and introduce Laura and Joel, who are Design Research Associates at Cardiff University, leading on the catalogue development and the Swansea demonstration homes. Over to you both, Laura and Joel.
Thanks, Steve. So today, myself and my colleague Joel here will be talking about how we're using design research approaches to transform the livability and energy performance of existing homes. So to give a brief overview of what's coming up, we'll begin with an introduction to the type of homes that we're working with and why. We'll then discuss the design research approaches we're taking and how co-design is underpinning the process. And finally, we'll talk about the catalogue of solutions being developed to disseminate the work. So to begin, the project focuses on developing scalable and transferable design solutions for social homes constructed between the two world wars, so around 1920 to 1940. These may be familiar to you as homes for heroes or garden suburbs, but even if these terms are new, I'm sure that you'll recognise the type of homes that we're working with. These were built as part of the first government-funded mass house building campaign in the UK, in response to the housing crisis in the aftermath of the First World War. They therefore represent some of the oldest housing stock still owned and managed by local authorities and social landlords in the UK.
So to give a bit of background, the political climate in the aftermath of the First World War provided the opportunity for a truly design-led movement of mass house building, with the aim to improve house building for working people through better design. The designers adopted many of the principles of standardization and mass production that had been developed as part of the war effort. Yet it's key to emphasize that much of the impetus behind the movement was to improve the standard of living and not just to provide enough homes. It's interesting that at the time it was the Ministry of Health who led the housing campaign. Even 100 years ago, there was a strong recognition of the link between good homes and physical well-being. So the way it worked was that subsidies provided by the government were dependent on compliance with a standard set of designs and specifications, which included example layouts. The 5 most representative of these are shown here, and they're often referred to as the Tudor-Walters types. These promoted the construction of remarkably similar housing right across England and Wales. It was low-density housing. All homes had large front and back gardens, and public green space was built into the estates. The homes themselves were in simplified cottage styles, nearly always 2-storey, and always either semi-detached or in short terraces. The vast majority have 3 bedrooms. Many had an inside bathroom for the first time for this kind of housing for working people, a small kitchen or scullery area, and 1 or 2 reception rooms. The majority of the homes built by the government were of cavity wall construction and brick built. And there was a key emphasis in design terms on natural light, on views, and on access to green space.
So in total, about 1.4 million of these homes were built via government subsidy between the 2 world wars, all across England and Wales. So you'll find them on the outskirts of most major cities and in many smaller cities and towns, as well as some rural settings. As part of our research, we've travelled to a number of these estates across England and Wales, and examples of homes from several of these estates are shown in the images on this slide. Whilst there's a variety in the appearance of the homes from the outside, as was encouraged by the guidance at the time to create some visual interest, fundamentally the houses are internally very uniform, which lends them well to the scalable and transferable approach that we're exploring through this project. Initially, the Transforming Homes project focuses on the around 500,000 of these homes which remain within social ownership. This is because social landlords are generally best placed to scale up solutions across their housing stock. And as we've seen in the past, the solutions developed for social housing are often adopted further down the line for privately owned and rented homes. This map shows levels of social tenancy across Swansea and highlights housing constructed during the interwar period. The area in the centre is the Town Hill estate, which we've been studying closely as part of the Transforming Homes project. It's a great example of an interwar estate with relatively high percentage of the homes remaining in the ownership of the council. So like many local authorities, Swansea Council have a comprehensive programme of retrofit work taking place across their housing stock. We really recognise that social housing tends to lead the way in improving housing quality, which is something that our partners at Mikhail will demonstrate in their next part of the webinar.
This image shows a pair of semi-detached homes, which are two of the demonstration homes in Swansea that we are transforming as part of the wider project. As Steve mentioned at the top of the call, there are 10 homes across 2 estates in Swansea and Bristol, which are being transformed in the life of the project. We are completing a series of works to these homes within the project, which allows us to bridge between the more speculative design work and real-world realised design work. These have been critical to our research, providing us with the opportunity to really understand the homes in detail, including exactly how they're constructed and how they perform. Whilst in this webinar, we're focusing on the wider scalable and transferable solutions being developed, we will often use these demonstration homes as an example, or as in this case, an illustration.
So now that you've got an idea about the type of homes we're working with, we're going to talk about the approach that we're taking to develop solutions to improve them. So as Steve discussed briefly in the introduction, the approach of the Transforming Homes project aims to go way beyond retrofit, considering the comfort and the livability of homes and broader environmental impacts than operational carbon. The design work centres around 3 interacting elements, which we're calling fabric, space and technology. So to give you an idea of how we're using these terms, the building fabric, for those who aren't familiar, refers to the physical makeup of the building, so the walls, roof, floors, windows and doors. There's a need to reduce energy use and increase comfort of homes by improving the performance of this building fabric. However, central to the project is the consideration of whole life carbon, balancing improvements in performance with the carbon impact of the materials and processes used to do this. Therefore, we're focusing on promoting the use of bio-based and non-extractive materials.
And in terms of space, we recognise that the homes we're working with were built to accommodate the way that people lived 100 years ago, and so are looking at how we can adapt these homes to make them better suited to modern needs and expectations.
And lastly, we're harnessing low carbon technologies to reduce reliance on fossil fuels and address fuel poverty. So this slide gives an outline of the process we've used to develop design solutions for these homes. We began a bit more than a year ago engaging with those living in the homes, and I'll go into more detail of that process in a minute.
Using the information that we gathered from the resident engagement and the other research across the project, we then held a series of co-design workshops with the interdisciplinary project team, culminating in a whole consortium charrette in May. This process was rooted in design-led methods, which we used to translate the interdisciplinary research into early design ideas, drawing on the different perspectives and expertise from across the project team. We are now at the stage of developing these design ideas and will continue to involve all of the project partners and residents to provide feedback and input as part of an iterative design process. The outcome of this will be the design catalogue, which is the means by which we plan to disseminate the research, and the process and outcomes of that will be covered in more detail towards the end of this presentation.
So as we've said, design-led ways of working underpin the approach, including physical model making, sketching and prototyping. These methods are effective in facilitating interdisciplinary co-design, and we'll talk more about how these analogue processes and physical objects and resources have aided in involving a wide variety of participants within the design process. So a crucial element of the co-design process has been engaging with residents of interwar social housing all across England and Wales. As the people who know these homes best of all, we recognise from the outset that these were the people who we had to learn from in order to develop appropriate solutions to transform the homes. The next webinar in this series will focus more on the social science aspects of the co-design work. So I'll focus in this section on how we use design-led processes and tools to involve residents in the co-design process. So the model that we used for this engagement process was the design charrette. The French charrette translates to cart in English. The second image is the cart that we've built as part of the project, which I'll talk about in more detail in a bit. So the word charrette's association with design reputedly stems from the École des Beaux-Arts, the renowned school of architecture in Paris, where wheeled charrettes were used to collect students' work on the day of submission, which is the culmination of intensive work to complete designs and drawings. So today, the engagement organisation Involve define a charrette as an intensive hands-on workshop that brings people from different disciplines and backgrounds together to explore design options for a particular area. It differs from a traditional community consultation process in that it is design-based. So whilst as part of the Transforming Homes project, we're working closely with residents of the demonstration homes in Swansea and Bristol, we recognise that their experiences of living in these homes could not be considered representative of the experiences of all residents of this type of housing across England and Wales. So to maximise the transferability of the solutions that we're proposing, it was important to involve residents living in these homes in a variety of different communities and contexts. Having identified a number of estates that varied sufficiently in terms of their physical location and the demographic of their residents, we made connections with organisations working in these areas to recruit participants and help us to organise the charrettes. It's important to say that these charrettes fulfilled a very different role to the physical data that we've been collecting via monitoring, surveys and the like in the demonstration homes. Instead, we recognise that it's just as important to understand how people perceive their homes. And so above all, the data that we were collecting was the residents' perceptions and experiences of living in these homes. So the charrettes, which each took place over the course of a day, were in 4 parts, with each activity building on the previous one. So after an introduction to the project and the workshop, residents began by constructing a model of their own home. With these models, the residents then mapped how they use their homes, highlighting what they value and what they find challenging about living there. In the afternoon, residents were introduced to some of the bio-based materials and low-carbon technologies identified by our research as being appropriate for the transformation of these house types. They then had the opportunity to transform their homes by making changes to the models. Lastly, the residents brought their models together to form a street and discuss changes that could be made as a community to transform the places that they live. As the previous slide showed, to facilitate the co-design process, we designed and made a bespoke package of resources, which acted as tools to enable everyone in the room to communicate in a common language. I'll go into some detail now around what we developed and how it worked in practice. So the first one to talk about is the cart. So building on the idea of the charrette, we built this cart to collect ideas and perceptions from the residents. It carried everything we needed around the country and then became an interactive workspace during the charrette. Participants would mark their homes on a map, take a drawer to fill with their work, and choose materials for their models. At the end of the workshop, it transformed into a street to which each participant added their home, forming a representation of their collective vision. We designed a series of flat pack models based on the 1919 house designs. Participants chose the design closest to their own home and developed their model throughout the day. So these models were the means by which participants communicated what their homes are like now, how they use the space, areas that they valued and struggle with, and the changes they'd like to make. So we also put together a kit of bio-based materials which participants used to transform their homes. This allowed improvements to be tested and visualized, such as adding more space, changing the layout, or insulating. To support all of this, we produced a series of printed resources, which range from bingo sheets to help residents to identify defining features of their homes, through to cards providing accessible information to explain different measures and materials. The models that the residents produced throughout the day were a key data source that we took away with us to analyse. Looking at these models, which are all covered in notes, it's it's been possible to draw out all sorts of information about the homes, the ways in which they're used, what about them is successful, and what changes would be of benefit. They've also allowed us to see relationships between the occupancy of the homes and how they perform and are perceived by residents. As well as the models, we audio recorded parts of the charrettes and took notes and photographs during the sessions to capture as much information as possible. We've gathered similar sources of information from our work with the residents of the demonstration homes, including recordings and notes from workshops and interviews. All of this data has been used as the basis for the design catalogue of scalable and transferable design solutions. The mind map on this slide was the output from a session that we held to work through all of the information that we gathered from our resident engagement work and translate it into a set of briefing points for the design catalogue to respond to. So we'll now talk a bit more about the process of developing both this brief and the design catalogue itself.
Great. So this section of the presentation will deal with the process of developing the information and ideas drawn from residents and the wider consortium into the initial work for the design catalogue. Working in such a large consortium, this has also involved carefully structured co-design to ensure that the perspectives and expertise of a multidisciplinary group are heard and incorporated. The work we'll show here is very much work in progress, as the design catalogue will be developed over the summer and autumn. So what will the catalogue be? In summary, it will be a document to aid decision-making in transforming homes built between 1920 and 1940. It will contain design advice to be interpreted and developed for different contexts and circumstances. As both Steve and Laura have mentioned, it will cover spatial, material and technological aspects of transformation. And as Laura has covered, it will be targeted specifically at social housing, local authorities and housing associations. And again, just to recap, but it's a really key point that the homes we're dealing with were built based on general design guidance provided by the government, which is then interpreted for specific contexts by local authorities and their architects. These drawings are from the 1919 Manual on the Preparation of State-Aided Housing, which accompanied the legislation mandating the delivery of the homes. The recurring design principles, which we know from both research and observation were followed, makes a catalogue approach particularly appropriate. Following the community charrettes, we hosted a series of co-design workshops with members of the consortium. Colleagues from different disciplines were brought together to discuss emerging challenges and opportunities to shape a brief for the following months of design work. These were all held in person in different locations across South Wales and the South West.
So each workshop had a clear structure and between 5 and 15 participants from across the project team, allowing us to draw on the wide range of expertise available. Discussions, explorations and developments were recorded throughout the workshop, primarily using drawings and sketches. The 6 initial workshops were each themed around a different provocation that had emerged from our design research to date.
So the first one was around space and space standards. So 100 years ago, homes were built to accommodate different ways of life and to completely different space standards. We looked at the changes that would be needed for the homes to meet contemporary space standards.
So a key aim of the project is to substantially reduce the operational carbon of these homes. We considered the best ways of making these reductions and the guidance and performance standards that we would target.
Thirdly, comfort and livability may be harder to measure than traditional performance metrics, but these are vital in achieving successful transformation. We discussed and mapped the input from residents in terms of their experience of their homes.
And then the 5th workshop, so the proposed interventions will use bio-based materials wherever possible to reduce embodied carbon and improve health and well-being. We considered likely approaches based on 2, 5 and 10-year timescales for implementation.
And then in terms of heritage and architectural value, the homes are now 100 years old and sit on the cusp of what is traditionally considered heritage buildings. What could we learn from taking a heritage-based approach to these often underrated homes and estates?
And finally, although the scope of the project is focused on the homes and their immediate surroundings, we looked at the potential for interventions beyond this, particularly because the design of these estates included green space and public amenities as key elements.
So one of the first things that we needed to develop in the workshops was a brief informed by the outcomes from the community charrettes. This slide shows a set of quotes taken from the discussions around the model making process that Laura described. So we analysed recordings and information gathered in the charrettes to identify recurring points and how these related to each other. It was clear throughout that as well as wanting to raise issues with aspects that did not work for them, residents often really valued their homes and saw huge positive aspects in both their homes and the wider estates and communities that they're part of. We used mapping and analysis of the information and ideas gathered from the residents to shape a set of key requirements for what these homes should provide. These were grouped into spatial elements such as space for a table, space with connection to outside, and adequate space for new technologies, and experiential things such as ease of operation, good natural light, and spaces that are cool in summer and warm in winter. This slide shows a selection of over 30 requirements that were compiled in this way. Following this, we began to explore how different briefing points could be achieved with a range of interventions to the homes. Through the workshops, colleagues from different disciplines across the consortium shaped this process and its outcomes. These examples of drawings made during or after the workshops show initial studies of spatial reconfiguration to meet current space limits, studies into the possibilities for extensions using the additive arts and crafts language of the homes, and explorations of construction details using bio-based and non-extractive materials. Following the workshops, we processed and developed these ideas to assist with further design development. And a key outcome that emerged from the workshops was the need for some kind of matrix to help assess the changes that were most needed to homes and how these could be achieved. We see this as a decision-making tool that will enable a large number of options to be reviewed and considered in the development of transferable proposals. This iteration is a physical version on our studio wall. The briefing points drawn from the resident co-design work are down the left-hand side, and a set of potential interventions drawn from the consortium workshops are along the top.
So we spent time distilling and developing the outcomes of the 6 initial workshops, and then presented this work back to the whole project consortium in a day-long charrette. This enabled us to explain the intended approach and structure of the catalogue in detail for the first time. We tested key principles and gathered feedback throughout the day for a range of design and making activities. This process of iteration through co-design will continue throughout the development of the catalogue. This slide shows examples of a set of postcards we used to demonstrate the proposed catalogue interventions and gather feedback. They also acted as prompts for the design activity that we delivered as part of the day. As for the resident co-design charrettes, we're keen to develop resources which allow those with different levels and areas of knowledge to communicate in a common language. Testing these resources on the project team has proven an invaluable means of gaining feedback and ensuring that the tools that we're developing are fit for purpose. As well as being resourced in their own right, we intend to develop the content of these postcards to present a component-based approach to transformation within the design catalogue. Worked examples will demonstrate how these different component interventions can be combined, and Joel's going to talk a bit more about that now.
So this is a brief return to the Swansea demonstration homes, just to discuss in a bit more detail some of the scope and how the catalogue will work. So it will show a series of worked examples where interventions drawn from the matrix are combined into suggested proposals for transformation. And altogether, it will include a range of different house types and different levels of intervention. So this example is based on the 4 demonstration homes at Town Hill in Swansea, where the work will be done next year. The homes are a very common type in 1920 to 40 estates, Tudor Walters Type B, for those of you that are familiar with that. And the proposals, which have been developed in close collaboration with Swansea Council, are focused on fabric improvements using bio-based materials and new low-carbon technologies. Also included, and you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, is a tech shed in the garden to house a domestic battery and additional solar panels, plus additional domestic storage space. So that scope has been shaped by a number of factors that we've worked through with Swansea. But a key element restricting the level of internal works that can be done on these homes is that the residents are likely to remain in situ throughout the works. So one of the things that we're keen to address in the catalogue and the way that these scenarios are explored is there will be different factors that inform decision making in the individual scenarios. So we need to explore what might be the key aims of each particular scenario and what might restrict proposals. So 5 suggestions for what these might be are shown down the left-hand side of this slide, and we'll continue to develop those as we work through the catalogue proposals. Another key aspect of the work we're doing is dynamic simulation modelling to provide data on a range of key performance metrics for the interventions proposed. So again, these 2 graphs are for the Swansea demonstration homes showing operational energy and operational carbon. And you can see on the graphs that post-transformation, the homes are likely to achieve over 60% reduction in operational energy and over 70% reduction in operational carbon emissions. And we'll also be doing modelling of embodied carbon and assessment of circular economy as we develop the catalogue over the coming months.
We plan to present different levels of transformation within the catalogue. This image demonstrates a worked example with a higher level of intervention than the previous one. The first floor has been reconfigured, reducing the number of bedrooms to meet modern space standards. A bay window and side extension demonstrate the efficacy of small additions to transform the space within these homes. This additive approach, if thoughtfully designed, is appropriate to the architectural language of the original homes, which were heavily influenced by the arts and crafts movement. This example also includes a tech shed, which our research indicates is likely to be a widely applicable solution to integrating low-carbon technologies within homes of this type, where internal space is at a premium. And whilst these worked examples currently provide a visual overview of how the proposed interventions could be combined, we'll be developing the architectural language of these as part of the catalogue. So that's the end of our presentation, but before we hand back to Steve, just a brief summary of what we've covered.
So firstly, the approach we're developing is scalable and transferable. This has been driven by the standardised designs for 1920 to 40 homes, of which nearly 1.5 million were built. And that's obviously a familiar number to anyone in the world of housing at the moment. 500,000 of those remain in social ownership.
The co-design's embedded throughout the work that we're doing. Crucially, this involves the residents of these homes in developing designs, but also over 50 members of the interdisciplinary project team.
And then finally, the development of the catalogue will be an iterative process over the coming months and likely beyond this. We'd really welcome feedback and participation in its development from a wide range of people with an interest in housing, including anyone on this call. So get in touch with us and keep an eye on the website and mailing list for updates and opportunities to input. So that's it from us, and we'll hand back to Steve. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Joel and Laura. I just want to, before we move on, just want to highlight that the Q&A is open. So if anyone has any questions, please post questions into that so that we can then maybe start collating them ready for the end. I know there are a couple there. Also with some questions where maybe it's easier to sort of provide feedback directly, then there are, I know that Joe has responded to one question, for example, in the Q&A. So we may also do that in parallel. Right, we will now move on to our second talk that provides reflections from practice. Mikhail Riches are a Sterling Prize-winning architecture practice, recognised as a UK leader in environmentally and socially inclusive design. With over 21 years of experience, the practice delivers beautifully crafted buildings with sustainability at their core, working across housing, education, community, master planning and the transformation of existing homes. Their work includes ambitious passive house, neighbourhoods, and pioneering strategies for upgrading the UK's ageing housing stock. The 2 speakers, James is an associate director leading teams across all scales from master plans to the delivery of high quality passive house homes for local authorities. And Sanju is an architect focused on low carbon affordable housing and research driven retrofit strategies that supports a just and sustainable future. Over to you both. Thank you.
Hi everyone, hopefully that's working.
Yes,
so,
it is, James, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. It's always good to know there's someone there. So I'm going to transport everyone 100 years forward from where Joel just was, and So yeah, roughly 100 years later from what we were just looking at on those lovely old drawings, this is what housing looks like today, or hopefully what we think good housing looks like today. So this is really focused on, low operational energy, very high performing homes. And what we'll take you through in this talk is a reflection on why haven't we been using more bio-based materials in practice, or have we been trying to and not been able to? So it's a little bit of a critical view on that. And then Sanju's going to have a look at our work as part of the Transforming Homes program. We'll try and bring it all back together. So we'll go away and we'll come back. So I'm going to start by taking you through how we're building new homes using bio-based materials, or trying to as much as possible. So this was a scheme that we finished almost 15 years ago now, called Clayfield in Suffolk, and it was a social housing scheme targeting sustainability in the broadest sense. So looking at low car usage, building using bio-based materials, which should sound very familiar from the talk we've just had. So these were timber framed homes using a hemp lime infill, so very highly insulated. You can see from this image timber shingles on the outside, so again very low embodied carbon. And then the actual homes themselves used roof lights, which you can see on here, to access free energy from the sun. So it was a solar orientated scheme. So all the ticks so far. So really high level of sustainability ambition, and tackling both operational and embodied carbon as part of the design, but also as part of that social infrastructure, creating a really great place for people to live. So you've got small children's play outside kitchen windows, creating that sense of community, and homes where people want to live. And this is just a little image of that construction that I was telling you about. So here you've got a structural timber frame that's infilled with hemp lime. And on the right here, you've got rammed earth blocks, which were used to form the external walls. So far, so good. And this was 15 years ago. So you'd expect everything in our portfolio moving on from this point to be probably of a similar ilk. And this is where comes the challenges in practice, which I'll take you through. So this should hopefully be a very familiar scheme to people. This is Goldsmith Street in Norwich. It's our scheme that won Sterling Prize in 2019. And the client came to us here with a brief that was to deliver passive house at scale. Very ambitious at the time. We didn't have loads of money to throw at the problem, so it was delivered for an incredibly affordable rate at the time. So about 20% more than what, a standard sort of building reg scheme was being built at. And we really invested in high quality building components, the spaces between the buildings. And I guess what you're not seeing in these images is what it's actually built out of, which is I'll go through in a minute. But ultimately, the outward facing bit, very similar to the homes that Joel was sharing with you, is robust, fairly sensible design, I'd like to say, not too controversial. It's not wearing its sustainability too heavily on its sleeve, but there's lots of little touches where it is embedded into these really high performing homes. The material palette, so as you see, again, not a lot of wood by comparison to the scheme that I've just shown you, but robust, long-lasting materials. And this is, I guess, the difference between the two schemes, is what's hidden within that brick robust outer skin is a really high performing building fabric. So the detail on the left there is showing you the thickness of the wall, of which around 400 mil was timber frame, highly insulated, very airtight, and it's just that outer skin that was brickwork, which a lot of people don't realise about the project, using triple glazing in terms of the windows, and then the brise soleils on the images here to reduce the overheating from the sun. But as I say, what's hiding behind all of that is modern methods of construction, a timber frame that was made in a factory, transported to site on the back of a lorry, and then erected very quickly. And one of the ambitions of the scheme originally with these big wide walls that we had was to actually use a wood fibre insulation between these walls. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that because there was no one in the UK that could actually put the wood fibre into the building on site. And this is probably one of those first reflections from practice, is that we had the best intentions of using actually a bio-based material without even that being the agenda. It was about what is the right thing to put in the wall for a highly sustainable project. We pivoted and used a warm cell, which is a recycled newspaper insulation, and that is quite widely used within the UK. But I just wanted to illustrate here that actually the level of ambition is there. And here was actually, we got tripped up by the fact that the labour wasn't available to do it on site. And here's our chap putting the blown newspaper into the wall. So really good for filling all those nooks and crannies within a timber frame. And that's the shared landscape space. So either side of this, this was part of the VE actually, was we removed the brickwork from the central spaces and used a rendered insulation board. And here comes another example of where we could have used a wood-based insulation. The reason, again, being completely open and transparent, is we used an EPS, which is a polystyrene oil-based, plastic-based insulation, because it's cheaper. And I guess this is where the Transforming Home programme will potentially allow the upscaling of wood fibre insulations within the UK that will bring that price point down and allow it to be used on new build construction, as we tried to in Norwich. What Norwich allowed us to do was scale up passive house and net zero carbon housing. And I'm now taking you up to York, where we've got a scheme which is being finished at the beginning of August and another scheme that will be finished later this year. So I guess the reflection from practice here is that, again, all of the DNA that was within the Goldsmith Street project that I have just shown you is being scaled up from an operational point of view. So we are now delivering multiple schemes of passive house net zero carbon homes. So that's great. And as we go through this presentation, you'll see that actually there should be a level of ambition to try and make more of these homes using more bio-based materials. So we did have a bigger embodied carbon agenda on these schemes. We could have put hemp in the walls, but again, there was no one to actually physically do it. And we could have changed the EPS insulation. Well, we've ended up changing it to rock wool actually, but again, the wood fibre insulation opportunity was there, but we haven't managed to do it. And that's where it's just about, where do you allocate funds? Membranes and lessons learned, we're still achieving good levels of air tightness, and we are using a wood-based board now instead of a plastic membrane to deal with the air tightness. And as I say, these projects will be finished imminently. Just flick through these. So I'm going to take even more of a negative turn now, I'm afraid, which is our Arcus Road project in London. And I wanted to just throw this one in the mix because, again, it shares all of that same DNA I've just taken you to. There will be a more positive turn in this presentation, I promise. But again, we should be able to build low-rise timber housing in the UK all day long using wood-based insulations. The problem is in London is that schemes like this aren't funded by the GLA if there's timber in the external walls. So all of these projects I'm showing you have a component of social housing. This one is 100% social housing, but it is not funded by the GLA because if we were to use timber frame to build it out of, which is a real shame. And this is where we will transition into the kind of retrofit part of this presentation, and how that level of ambition, when applied to existing homes, could be really scaled up. So I'll hand over to Sanju at this point.
Amazing, thanks, James. So following on from sort of the new build work, I'll be talking through sort of transforming existing buildings and how we can push for low carbon, high quality sort of spaces within the constraints of existing buildings. So I'll focus on two projects. So Park Hill, which is a Grade 2 listed modernist icon in Sheffield, and also our work within the Transforming Homes Research Consortium after. So at Park Hill, we're working with this sort of incredible listed building, Grade 2 listed, but our approach sort of went beyond just preserving what was listed, which is the concrete frames. So we tried to retain everything that works as much as possible, party walls where possible, floors, external walls, and even the original brickwork. So surprisingly, the brickwork was one of the hardest elements sort of to convince teams to keep. But it is a big part of the British brutalist post-war sort of movement and architectural period. But almost because the brickwork was set and laid in lime mortar, it had sort of moved with the bricks over time, so it prevented cracks rather than if it was a cement-based mortar. And that really helped us convince of retaining this beautiful brick panel. And that flexibility allowed us to sort of really just clean and reseal it, so we didn't even need to repoint it. And that way we were able to retain sort of the original coloured palette and the brickwork, which at the time was sort of curated with an architect on the design team in the 60s. So that was really a big win on every front. But I guess from a carbon perspective, we focus on embodied carbon by retaining as much of the original fabric as possible, and operational carbon by sort of improving the performance. And you can see on the right where we've got balconies and these coloured rendered reveals. We've externally insulated them, and then we've got a render over it. But that said, the constraints that we've hit are particularly, again, around bio-based materials. So this building is over 11 meters high. So due to current fire regulations, it just means that we have to use sort of much more traditional mineral wool insulation, so category A insulation materials. Oops, sorry, James.
Sorry.
Back again, if that's okay. And then it's just really a reminder of like the policy barriers we're still working within. Spatially, we try to update the living experience, so retaining the width of the iconics of streets in the sky, whilst improving passive surveillance, natural light, for example, like placing kitchen windows onto the street. But if there's time later, I'm happy to speak more about sort of the internal typologies. If anyone's got any questions, we can run through those. Next, please. Thank you. So now just looking through the Transforming Homes research project. So we've had the opportunity again, as Steve was describing, to be as part of this really exciting, diverse, multidisciplinary team. So working across architecture, policy, engineering, co-design. So looking at how we can meaningfully transform into our housing stock, but from lots of different angles. Next, please. There are 1.1 million of these homes in the UK, so it's a real potential and opportunity. So it's because they're low rise, we can use bio-based materials here. So hemp, wood fiber, warm cell, cork, it really just unlocks the opportunity, and really the opportunity of using breathable, you know, thinking about the comfort of these homes and really focusing on sort of healthier living environments. But also thinking about it not just as individual homes or individual family units, but homes as part of a terrace or a street. And this again unlocks more strategies for embodied carbon and operational carbon, and also spatial improvements. We're charting out here, I guess, the current whole house, you know, traditional retrofit, but we want to be looking beyond retrofit and thinking about how we can, you know, transform these homes beyond that. But by engaging with sort of diverse group within the consortium, local authorities, and co-designing with residents, we were able to start picking out within the process where we can go beyond. So here we're looking at terraces and streets, not just at individual homes, combining embodied and operational carbon. And we're able to ask questions around how can we use bio-based materials here? Can this become a training opportunity for local groups? Can we co-deliver as well as co-design with residents? And also thinking about like energy systems, like ground source heat pumps. Can these be shared across the street instead of just looking at an individual unit? But again, looking beyond all of that and thinking about the spatial quality of these homes, they were built in the 1930s, and our worlds have transformed so much since then, since they were originally built over 100 years ago. So how do we transform spaces to better respond to the changing needs of the current and future residents for another 100 years to come? So we've really explored typology transformation. So thinking about, you know, small rear extensions that allow for multi-generational living, ground floor bedrooms and bathrooms that support aging in place or wheelchair accessibility, extensions that sort of just unlock better ways of living. And for us, it's been really exciting to be able to then take these ideas and continue to develop them with the wider consortium, but also co-design it with residents in a really meaningful process. And here we've just got some of the testing that University of Bath did with the materials and trying to better understand the performance of the existing materials within the build-up and sort of traditional installation methods. So here we've got an example of how you might transform 2 of the original 5 typologies that Laura and Joel presented earlier. So using the same small sort of rear extension at the back, so in the green boxes, where we've got sort of a self-contained kitchen and dining space for 7 people, we're able to transform the entire home. So we're able to then add an additional downstairs WC, whereas before there's just a 1 bathroom, make the bathroom wheelchair accessible downstairs, and then also add an additional self-contained bedroom, which would be wheelchair accessible, and all to current and future space standards. And so for us, it's really about how we can make sort of a renewed typology that is responding to the current resident needs that we are engaging with as part of the co-design process, but also thinking about, you know, the 500,000 council housing stock there is, and an opportunity here to really diversify the housing stock that councils have. These are some details that we worked on for the extension. So using bio-based materials. So here it's a block build system. So we've got OSB panels with a system with insulation that can be sort of wood fiber insulation, warm cell. It can be a bio-based, a fully bio-based system. And it's really exciting. There's a lot of different bio-based systems in the market at the moment. But also this would give us an opportunity where we could potentially, CNC this locally and have a local community build as part of this. So not just thinking about co-design, but co-delivery, and again, how we can start to think about upskilling and new skill sets within sort of green construction. Yes, I think it's a really exciting time. So where the momentum again is starting to shift towards bio-based, and hopefully through this research project, we're able to present a process that puts it at the forefront and shows the opportunities and also the complexities around bio-based materials, where there are maybe some gaps in policy, supply chains, and manufacturers. We can hopefully fill that in the coming years. And this is an ongoing process as part of the co-design, and hopefully we can showcase this coming soon. And then just reflecting back on both the new build and the existing projects we've done so far over the years, all of them try to champion operational carbon, embodied carbon, and always high quality spaces for everyone. But Clayfields was really pioneering in its use of bio-based materials. And then Goldsmith Street sort of pushed for operational carbon, and then we carried forward those legacies in York and Arcus in some parts. But there's still very much a battle. Whilst the appetite is growing for bio-based materials, it's still limited by policy, cost, and sort of risk perception. Just like Passive House was once, and yet with Passive House, it's now proven, scalable, and a process that can be managed and delivered successfully. We believe that we can get there with bio-based materials too. And for us, projects like Transforming Homes is an opportunity to sort of help chart that path forward, not just technically, but socially and spatially too. It's been great for us to be able to reflect on our practice and identify where we've been celebrating and where there's more opportunity for the use of low carbon, high quality housing for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, James and Sanju, for that. Right, you've now heard all the talks, so we will open up to some questions. I'll start with some of the questions which are in the Q&A, just because they've been building a little bit, so I'll go through those. But if anyone has any live questions they would like to ask, and that'd be great to maybe have a sort of a conversation, then please put your hand up and we'll try and mix those in. We've got about 30 minutes, so yeah, plenty of time to try and get through as many questions as we can. Also, just to remind you that we don't necessarily, in this webinar, we have effectively 5 or 6 people representing around 50 in our consortium. So we're not able necessarily to answer all different angles. So some of the maybe physical sciences or some of other aspects, we may not have necessarily the right people here. Joe is in the Q&A adding some answers to some of those questions, but we will always aim to try and get back to these questions as we can. So and there's the other 2 webinars may also be an opportunity to pick up on some of these other questions if you're able to attend them. So if I go to the first question that was in the chat, I'm starting at one of the older ones, this one will be for Laura and Joel. So Kate O'Sullivan says, this approach is brilliant. I'd like to know a bit more about the tools you provided for participants, the information cards, etc. What information did they convey? It's a several part question, but it's more about information about how the charrettes were conducted. How did you establish the level of technicality for public participants, and how well were they received, and so on? So, Laura Jo.
Hiya, thanks, Kate. So the information cards that we developed, they were originally actually developed through some of the workshops with the residents of the demonstration homes in Bristol. And so we were sort of looking at kind of what was the base level of what people really needed to know to be able to think about how they could transform their homes. This was in an activity where they were able to kind of add their own interventions. And I think from those workshops, we developed a second set of those cards for the nationwide charrettes, acknowledging that the people who we were going to be working with in the nationwide charrettes, we only had one day with them, and we couldn't go into quite the same level of detail as we did necessarily in the workshops with the residents of the demonstration homes. So it was it's still an iterative process, sort of making changes and testing out what is on those cards. And I think we'll develop them further, and we've kind of developed that second set that's based on some of the ideas for the design catalogue. But yeah, I think it's just keeping on trying out what we think will work, and then getting feedback from residents and from other stakeholders on what does and doesn't work, and then, you know, making a version 3, 4, 5 and seeing how that goes. I don't know if you wanted to.
And there's a question about within there, there's a question about the level of technicality for public participants. I guess the way that we tried to address that was to make sure that the technical information communicated was kind of simple and based on first principles, so that it was easy to understand without an explanation. And then what quite often happened is, if there was a set of those cards on the table during one of the charrettes, residents who were particularly interested in technology might pick them up and flick through them and look in more detail, and they would gain an understanding of that and ask more questions about it. But we weren't forcing everyone into a kind of technical discussion if they weren't comfortable or interested in that.
Okay, thank you for that. There are some other questions about the co-design process that I was just going to go through, and then maybe come on to some more of the technical ones related to the work we're doing at Swansea and Bristol and so on. So Richard Dingle says, what did the team take from the co-design feedback with regard to the success or otherwise of standardised 20s to 40s housing? Is there a role for more standardisation in affordable housing in the modern age to meet the scale of delivery needed?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think perhaps the way that we, as outsiders or people working from the kind of professional side of the project, view these homes as standardized doesn't feel necessarily like the way that residents of these homes see them. Because I think as soon as you're living in one of these homes and personalizing it in your own way, and yeah, I don't think that there was necessarily this perception that these homes were all the same. And I think maybe that's also a result of them being 100 years old, and all of the things that people have done to these homes themselves and that local authorities have done to these homes. It was interesting in some of the charrettes with the residents starting to speak to each other and build their models of their homes, and actually realising how identical they were, even though perhaps at a surface level, a lot of the people living in these homes didn't necessarily kind of acknowledge before that their home actually had the exact same layout as their neighbours, for example. I think I think the role of standardised housing
I guess it's a really obvious point to make, but I think it may be worth making. I think one of the key things that's come out in understanding a lot more detail about the standards and how we were implemented is that they were very good standards, both in terms of the space and the spatial organization for the time, and also the way the buildings were constructed. And we've learned that, you know, across the country, talking to people about what they like about their homes, often they are things that were identified in the original 1919 and later reports to do with living rooms being double aspect, for example, or, you know, living rooms being well lit, bedrooms being thoughtfully arranged, and so on. And I think the other part of that is the way that the homes were built. And as we touched on in the presentation, the great thing about working at both the kind of larger transferable scale and the scale of the demonstration homes is we can understand in a huge amount of detail how those 10 homes that we're working on were built. And we were up on some scaffolding with one of the roofers from Swansea Council the other day doing some inspections, and he was really impressed by the quality of the slate work, the copper nails, which were all original and which you can see in the original government specification. So I think a key takeaway is that the standards are really good and then were carried through to deliver that number and that quality of homes.
Yeah, so I suppose, yeah, as a kind of takeaway, standardization, if it's done well, it seems like a very good approach, but it's all about, yeah, the quality of the standards as much as them being standardized, I think.
Okay, thank you both. Another one, I think, for you in relation to our sort of our design research approach. So from Phoebe as you. Thanks for the great presentation. Could you please illustrate more details about how the iterative process, the third phase, has been done?
So I think that will be done in a similar way to the way we've described, in that there needs to be time for the kind of smaller team that are developing the catalogue to, develop things and test ideas amongst the team. And then what we'll do is we'll plan in a series of structured workshops where both the consortium and groups of residents are able to look at the work that's been done and feed back. And I think that probably the aim would be that as the catalogue develops over the next few months and probably beyond, we'd like to find opportunities to draw in more feedback on that. So it's very much a work in progress. Several of the things that we've described on the call were ways of testing that and thinking about how you can communicate and test and develop ideas, but it's very much an ongoing process, and we'll be structuring that, over the next few months, as I said.
And I think another key thing to say on that is that we're looking at, with this process, how we can engage other stakeholders as well. So really crucially for the design catalogue that's currently aimed towards stockholders of social housing from this period. So we're developing ways to kind of create similar charrettes or similar engagement workshops to test some of the ideas with the people who are actually going to be using these design catalogues at the end of it.
Thank you both. Just to add in as well, around the iterative process of design research, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, not everyone I know was able to join right at the beginning. Design research is meant to be a process that, as we draw, design, model, work with the residents, hold more of these charrettes, that we develop more and more questions to be able to explore not just a solution that says that, we need to put a bay window on or something, but actually to see the opportunities that has on a holistic level to be able to integrate technology, bio-based materials, and what that may then mean for internal space and so on. So that iteration is by nature will be sort of open-ended, but lead to these catalogue of ideas and solutions that we'll be producing. Right, moving on to some more technical ones, I think, at the moment, and then maybe there's some more recent ones that we might return to. Please, James, Sanju, if you want to come in as well on some of these in relation to this first one will relate more to Swansea and the tech sheds, but if there's anything that starts to cross over with your experience and practice, then please also answer. So Magdi Khalil has asked, how big are the tech sheds? Have you considered having like a super shed similar to district heating infrastructure? So maybe Joel or Laura, Swansea.
Yeah, I mean, we're working through it at the moment, and one of the things we're looking at, because we're working very closely with Swansea, is the sort of technologies that they're integrating in their general retrofit programme and the amount of space that takes up. And then seeing if there are ways that we can also integrate things like extra domestic storage. And we're really hoping that the tech sheds will be kind of a flexible, perhaps modular design that can increase or decrease in space depending on what needs to go in there. But it's very much a work in progress at the moment. The super sheds, I'm not sure, are they a specific kind of design of something that I haven't heard of those before. So.
Yeah, maybe Magda, you want to add a note to your question in response to that question. I mean, we have looked at and we have considered issues around district heating infrastructure and using the nature of the estate and small terraces to be able to generate energy as a collective rather than necessarily individual homes. We haven't necessarily come to conclusions or anything on that at the moment. And as the project progresses, the nature of these sheds as well, that at the moment are being developed at the one-to-one house level, because we're trying to look at how that relates to the way in which people are living in their homes, as well as how it actually improves the performance of the home or the house. But it may well lend itself to opportunities to look at a bigger picture as well. Right, moving on to some other questions. So there's a question, I'm just trying to find it, about air tightness. So this may be relevant to maybe Joel for Swansea and Sanju and James for the Bristol homes. So I can't find it immediately, but the question was about how, oh, here it is, from Seb Lanlomas. Fascinating co-design work. Can you expand on whether the designs include air tightness improvements, and if so, to what level?
Well, we've talked quite a lot about the Swansea home, so maybe if Sanju, would you be up for talking about that in terms of the Bristol home?
Yeah, that's fine. And James, feel free to jump in. But I think where we are also looking at it more holistically, so we are improving the fabric of the home, so adding insulation externally. We are replacing windows. So we are improving the fabric as a whole. And I think whilst we're doing that, we then have an opportunity to look at the junctions and how the detail of how things interact, and then therefore able to seal things much better, and thinking about, again, membranes, tapes, and make everything a bit more airtight. And then to complete the whole process, I guess, when we are then improving the fabric, improving air tightness, we then just need to make sure everything's well ventilated, so you then don't have other problems of like mold and condensation. But that's big picture. Don't know, James, do you want to jump in on anything more detail?
I might go slightly more broad, actually. I think what was one of the interesting things that came out of the co-design workshops was the reality. I think Steve touched on the fact that, residents may still be in the homes when these works happen. And to get the levels of air tightness that would be ideal, you've got to unpick quite a lot of, existing internal finishes. A good example is one of the residents had just had a new flooring fitted, and we sort of posed the challenge of, to insulate the floor, you've got to lift the floor to get to the joist, to insulate between the joists, at which point you can do the air tightness. So you would do both at the same time. But to do that, you've got to completely clear out your ground floor so that you can take all the flooring up to do all of those works. And I think this is where, in an ideal world, you would do a whole house in one hit and people would move out and then move back in. But there's a kind of reality and a practicality to it. And I think that probably is one of the biggest challenges of how you retrofit 1.5 million homes properly to the levels that they should be. Because, air tightness is, it's a really easy win in terms of reducing energy loss, but it's very hard to deliver in reality on a retrofit.
Okay, thank you, James. Joel, did you want to add anything from the Swansea homes to that at all?
I think James's point covered it. I mean, yes, it's on the Swansea demos. It's exactly the same in that it's balancing that need to achieve a good level of air tightness and the level of disruption that is possible with the residents in situ. I guess the only other thing to add and build on what James has said, picking up on the kind of transferable elements and how the catalogue will work. I think part of that decision-making infrastructure that it sets out will obviously need to help stockholders through that process of deciding what's appropriate, where the easy wins are and where things are more challenging. But to come back to the question, air tightness will be a key factor in that. And yeah, we're obviously aware that it needs to be considered throughout.
Yeah, and I think also providing the kind of research-backed evidence, so modelling data and worked out samples, to really allow housing stockholders to kind of weigh up those options, to sort of say there's going to be this much disruption, but actually this is the potential saving for that. And actually, yeah, I think it's kind of a disruption cost effectiveness sort of triangle that yeah.
Just to build on that, I can see there's another question around, improving space standards and loss of bedrooms. I think generally there hasn't been any loss of bedrooms. What we've tried to do is reproportion and make storage better as a result of conversations with residents. And in some cases, that's just about moving a wall, which sounds quite dramatic, but if it isn't a load bearing and it's just a stud wall, that actually is one of those transformational things that means you get better proportioned bedrooms upstairs. But I think one of the things we realised, I think it was one of the first things we did actually on the programme, is we looked at comparing the existing home standards to modern space standards, which isn't really fair because they're 100 years prior. But we realised that actually there's the small extensions that we add to the rear as part of this wider package of works. You could just insulate the homes but not change the space standards. I think that's where the Transforming Homes programme looks to do all of these things to get that new home, if you like. But I guess what the interesting point is that in adding those small extensions, you bring those homes up to what is considered a modern space standard, which I think is a kind of really interesting point because it gets it ready for the next 100 years. You could put all this money just into dealing with the fabric, but actually it's still small. And I think that's where trying to see it holistically with the spatial changes as well actually means then that you're almost kind of making these homes ready for the next 100 years.
Yeah, and just to add to that, oh, sorry.
No,
I was just going to say, as part of looking at the additional space and increasing and improving spaces, it's also about the quality of spaces and trying to improve the layout so you can better use the space that you do have in your homes as well. And by adding that extension, as James was saying, also thinking about making it more wheelchair accessible or wheelchair adaptable, about aging in home, and maybe making it multi-generational as well, thinking about more diverse uses.
Just before Laura, you may come on that, just so because we've moved on to another question, so just so I can read it out for everyone. It's a question from Orla Kerr. Just so because we've moved on to space standards. I fully support the objective to improve space standards, but what is the uptake from residents on the idea of reducing the number of bedrooms to improve function when typically the value of a home is sadly based on the number of bedrooms rather than the size? I know you may not directly respond to that, Laura, but I just wanted to put the question in there that we're talking about.
No, it was a similar point actually, because one of the things, and it comes back to that question that we had right at the beginning on the kind of standardized approach, is that all of these estates were basically built for kind of young families in a way. So every single house is a 3-bedroom house, or rather 2 rooms that we would now consider suitable as bedrooms and 1 small room. And so they're really made for just one type of family, and that doesn't really represent the way that families are now, but it also doesn't represent the kind of space that you need over the course of a lifetime either. So we find a lot of people are living actually in homes that have too many bedrooms and too much space for them because they want to stay in the same area throughout their lives, but actually these estates only have 3-bedroom homes. So if we can look at kind of diversifying the accommodation so that you can live in these homes as a young family, maybe as your family grows more people might live in it, and then over time people move out, for example, and there's a need actually for homes of different sizes. And if we can look at how these same homes can be adapted to accommodate these different kind of whole life uses, then as a way to diversify an estate is actually quite an interesting and more sustainable, perhaps, way, in a holistic sense of the term sustainable, to view the kind of space standards conversation.
And I was just going to say that the different, the original housing typologies from the Tudor Voltaire report, the 5 different typologies, they all present very different opportunities in adapting as well. So I think if you take a very similar approach, but apply it to the different typologies, you unlock very different types of housing. For example, one of the other typologies, you could potentially make it into two separate units. So both have front doors, two streets, one ground floor sort of separate unit and an upper floor separate unit. And that again is very similar to what we did at Goldsmith Street as well. But there's just a lot we can do with these typologies. By applying a very similar approach, you get very diverse sort of housing stock.
Okay, we'll move on to another question. I think this one maybe is better for James or Sanjeev to answer. So I know it's been answered in the chat, but it connects to another question as well. So the first was, what is the reason for the GLA? Sorry, what is the reason for the GLA not allowing timber framed homes? This comes from Nicole Solomons. And then just before you answer that one, there's a question. Sorry, I'm scrolling to it. From Seblan Lomas. Are you able to speak about how the catalogue, so in terms of the catalogue, maybe if you can approach it from practice, because we haven't necessarily got to that point yet, but how it will speak to fire and insurance? I'm aware insurers and building control are acutely alive to the discussion of adding combustible materials. Any guidance for designers would be very valuable. Don't know, James, are you able?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll do the GLA one first. They've just got a blanket ban on using timber in an external wall from low rise to high rise. Obviously, the high rise as post Grenfell, there is a certain logic in why they will take that position. Unfortunately, that's trickled down to lower rise buildings, despite numerous reports from people that know a lot more about it than me. Arup, for example, have done a report on the risk of fire in low rise timber housing, I'm going to say. So yeah, I use this as an opportunity just to flag that it is a real shame that I think there's examples all over the rest of the country where we're building building regs compliant timber housing which could have bio-based materials as part of the external wall, and in London where we're also being chased to build millions of homes, we're not able to do that. So hopefully they'll change position on that. And then Seb's question around fire insurance, I think there is probably an important point here, which is that these are, demonstrator homes. This is a research project. It's something that, as a practicing architect, we've sort of leaned into the world of research, and it is a different place. But at the same time, we are doing these to real homes, and that's where research has then lent back into practice. So I think all of the products that we're looking to use, we're not looking to use anything too fruity. The stuff that we're using has the correct BBA certificates and warranties. And ultimately, these are happening to real council homes. So the conversations are happening with the councils around insurances, etc. So, as I say, these aren't happening, in a lab somewhere. These are real world homes happening with real world people. So yeah, all of the usual things that you would apply in practice are being applied for. And that was one of the earlier points that we had, speaking to the universities, is what are we actually proposing here as the research piece. So I think that's covered the question.
Yeah, I was just going to add something to that one as well, in relation to the catalogue and our wider research. So we, as part of the catalogue and the development of designs which are they're not directly connected to the demonstration homes, we're using those homes and conversations with the residents, but also our wider consortium of knowledge that includes, James and Sanju's expertise from practice around these things, to consider these in relation to design proposals that we make. And the idea is that some of these design proposals may be speculative, they may be provocative and as I said at the beginning, they may cross areas which also will require policy change or regulation change. So some ideas will be practical, very deliverable sort of, immediately. Some may be more looking at 5 or 10 years down the line to say, well, if we really want to look at how to change these homes, reduce the embodied carbon and increase more bio-based materials and so on, we may have to have an impact and change in other areas. So that will be then reflected in the catalogue of designs as it emerges later. And that answer also relates to Sam Goss's question. Have you sought to provide any cost approximations for different measures to inform the work planned? Thanks for superb presentations. Thank you very much, Sam, on behalf of the speakers here. But yes, we do have plans, and obviously maybe I'll hand back to Joel and Sanju and James in relation to the cost side of things from the Swansea and Bristol homes. But we are also planning to cost design proposals that we come up with thinking around what that means now, but also then looking at economies of scale and, other factors that may well make some things that may be seen unaffordable now may become affordable later. So we are planning to sort of do some cost work around design proposals as they emerge. But I don't know if Joel, James, or any of you, any of the four of you have any comments in relation to Swansea Bristol on costs?
I think the tricky thing is going back to this point around their demonstrator homes. There is a budget for the project, but we are trying to do things that are non-standard. So, the costs are, I wouldn't say they're abnormally high, but they are higher than probably what you would build a basic brick and block extension for. And I think I did add a comment here, is that I think links back to our presentation is it's all about scale. At the moment, if you want to do external wall insulation, your only real options are probably to go down a polystyrene route, which has, you could be argued has a fire risk, or can't be used on high buildings, or a mineral wool. And this goes back to the question Seb had around fire and insurances, is that different local authorities have different positions on this, different heights of buildings, even though there is a building regulation backstop. I think as demonstrator projects, there is a very clear objective of what they're trying to deliver as part of the Transforming Homes programme. And I think what I'd like to think will happen out of this is that you'll see a scalability to some of these maybe more niche insulation products that do exist, and they do exist to people in practice to use. But it's that opportunity of, right, actually, someone's going to get awarded 100,000 homes to do in a wood fibre insulation. And this project is trying to give the confidence to show that it can be done, and be done at scale, and that there isn't any risk around that in terms of moisture, and that there's resident buy-in, etc. And what we might see is that the cost of those materials then come down over the long term, and they become comparable, if not more favourable, to other insulation types. That's what I would like to see out of this project long term, because then that would allow us to specify them on new build homes, and the cycle continues. So
you mentioned a catalogue of findings being published this summer. Did I mishear that? And if so, how would you make it available widely to various housing associations? Or can you just expand on that for me?
Well, I can start, and maybe Laura and Joel will want to respond. So yes, as part of our project, we will be preparing we're going to call it. It won't be published as a draft. It will be a catalogue that will be completed around the end of September, maybe going into sort of early October, but around that time. It'll be seen as an interim catalogue because we are going to be able to do ongoing work to expand it further. And yes, our plan is to disseminate that as broadly as we can. It'll be via our website, and we will be making it available to local authorities, housing associations, but we're open to as the wider network as we possibly can, because as part of the iterative design research approach, it'd be great to get feedback from from a wider audience and stakeholders, because it will be an interim publication, and we will develop and expand further. And there'll be work in it. There'll be aspects of work that we won't have done in that catalogue that we will be doing as it moves forward. We need to come to a close now. We've just gone past the 1:30. So thank you everyone for joining and for attending, and your valuable sort of questions, and some of them are insights, I suppose, to us. They're useful for us to reflect on, definitely, and sort of embed into the work we're doing. I'd like to thank our speakers, of course, Laura, Joel, Sanju, and James, for your time, and they're putting together those presentations. I think they've been really useful, judging from the comments in the Q&A. And we hope, to everyone that's joined, we hope that this has highlighted some opportunities for further conversations with us and amongst your own sort of projects, your own teams, your own organisations, and so on, or areas that may enhance your ongoing practice, or even ours, if you would like to reach out afterwards and share some thoughts or things that we maybe are missing or can expand on. If you're interested in knowing more, please follow us on LinkedIn, but also if you can go to if you can sign up as well on our website to our newsletter, that will keep you in touch. And of course, there's more information on the website as well, so that you can find out more information, more material, and more sort of responses and showcases on certain people and work that we're doing. And of course, the upcoming webinars will also be really good, valuable to to find out more, of course, in other parts of the project. So just a reminder that we have two more. On 9th of July, giving everyone a voice through co-design, and then on the 16th of July, transforming homes at scale. So hope you'll be able to join us again for those. Thank you. And also just like to thank in the background, we have Veronica and Dilek and Joe. Joe's been answering questions in the chat, and Veronica and Dilek have been making this whole process work and put together the entire webinar process series, adverts and PR and so on. So thank you to the wider team for their support on this. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll see you on the 9th of July or the 16th of July.